Nothing. What's going on, guys? Guys, I just got back from doing my 10,000 steps. And Monday through Thursday, guys, I meal prep, but Friday through Sunday, I just maintain my 10,000 steps at a minimum, but I tend to freestyle with my beverages. This is only 5 calories, sparkling water. But guys, I'm gonna give y'all a few minutes. I'm gonna let more people show up and let me make sure I got everything. I found more notes. And guys, I made another video almost like a year ago of notes that I accumulated over the years. I wanted to go over the questions that I asked myself a few years ago, kind of like a third person point of view perspective here. But guys, I briefly went over maybe one or two scenarios. I believe I talked about the returns, and I believe I talked about, actually I have them right here. I went over Takeo, Honeywell, and the Takeo, Honeywell, and let me see here, hold on. Yeah, guys, the zone valves. I went over zone valves. I think I went over returns, but let me show you what I'm looking at here. Because I'm not trying to go over the same things that I already talked about. Advantages of this is done. How to remove gas valves. I believe I went over this last time too. And guys, for reference, you should look at, I don't think I titled it. I think I titled it $680,000 worth of notes or something like that. If you look at my highest view live video, you'll see the part one to what I'm making today. Today is part two, but like I said, guys, I'm gonna give you all a few minutes. I'm gonna be here for a while, so this is gonna be a great video for you guys. If you didn't know what I'm talking about, this would be a great video for you guys to learn and hopefully get better. I'm just trying to find some good ones to go over. I got some AC notes as well. Guys, I'm not going to really get into AC stuff now since it's already winter season. So I want to keep the premise of what I'll talk about today. I want to keep this strictly heat related, whether it be furnaces, heat pumps, and boilers. But I can start here. It says how to remove gas valve. And guys, this is pretty self-explanatory what I have here. And I mentioned this one a few weeks ago. Both of these are gas valves, but the specifics of these two valves are different. This is a smart gas valve, and this is a spark ignition gas valve. And I'm going to go into the ignitions probably later on. I've seen that before I start this live video. I think that's on another card, but I'm going to get into the ignitions of different gas valves later on. But make a long story short, guys, the similarities between these valves is the piping size you see here. Typically it's 3/4 openings, and you can reduce it to 1/2 inch. Depends on, like I said, the setup. Typically you're going to have 1/2 inch gas line coming from the gas line going to your furnace. So even though the openings are 3/4, you can always reduce it. You can use the 3/4 by 1/2 inch reducer bushing, or they should come with the gas valve itself in the package. But guys, you want to make sure when removing these, you want to have a backup wrench. Now, of course, what I'm telling you guys, I don't have a gas valve hooked up to the system. I only have the part itself. But if you had to remove these, assuming you guys already know how to wire these up, that's pretty self-explanatory. But the physical part of removing gas valves, you want to make sure, of course, you turn the gas off, and you're going to need a primary wrench and you need a backup wrench. And make a long story short, I think instead of me trying to explain this, I could draw this on the board. And for you guys that are just getting in here, I got a couple hours to burn. I'm making a part two of all the notes that I accumulated over the years. But guys, I'm gonna look at the comments in a second. Let me draw this furnace. Hold on. Let me see here. And guys, once again, my handwriting didn't improve, but I can explain everything I draw, so bear with me here. All right, let's see here. These can be the burners. This can be my fan. And I'm going to label this. And for you guys just getting in here, I'm just going over some flashcards that I found. Like I said, none of these cards are dated, so I can assume that everything I'm showing you is from at least 10 years ago, but I'm answering all the questions that I once wrote down, and this will be a great exercise for you guys that had the same questions I had back in the day. We're going to go over as many as I possibly can while I still have time here. But let me see here. IND, this is going to be the inducer. And I'm going to try to use some different colors here. Make sure I don't lose my cap here. So the question that we're going to go over is how to remove the gas valve. And this is going to be my shutoff. And this is going to be my GV. All right. And we're going to use a good old gas valve here. And once again, guys, this is the gas valve and this is the gas furnace. The question was how to remove a gas valve. Now, for one, guys, and I think common sense is not really so common, but how I explain things in a very simple way. If you don't know how to do this, it's best to, like say, get a qualified professional. I don't recommend any customer or anyone that doesn't know how equipment work or how to troubleshoot or how to replace parts. I don't recommend you going down and touching anything with gas or electricity. I don't want you guys to hurt yourself. So with that being said, with these gas valves, you have an entry point. You see the arrow here? You have the entry point. The entry point is coming from your gas meter. So guys, once again, this is self-explanatory, but I have no problem with dumbing this down. And guys, if you have any questions, there's no stupid questions. Just make sure whatever questions you ask is relative to what I'm talking about so we can save time here. But the entry point, this is the gas line coming from your meter that goes from a gas line. This is the gas shutoff, which is how you shut off the gas to make repairs on the gas line. And this GV is my gas valve, which is what I'm holding in my hand here. And you see here, this gas valve has a direction. So my entry point is here. And hypothetically speaking, once the thermostat calls for heat, that starts the sequence of operations. And once this gas valve gets power to open, that's when the gas valve opens. And depending on your ignition, let's say this is a spark ignition, where this be a hot service ignition, regardless of what you have, once your igniter glows or sparks, that happens first. And then your gas valve says, hey, I have power, let me open up. So guys, I say that to say this, you should always have constant gas going to your gas valve, but the gas valve is not going to open up unless there's a demand for the heat to turn on. So that's important to know. But like I said earlier, guys, to replace this, you need a primary wrench and you need a backup wrench. Now, I can explain that with a quick illustration. So let's say this is the gas line. Let me see here. And guys, what I'm drawing here, I can't really give you a detailed explanation with this because this is like the blowed up image. I'm going to blow up the gas line and I'm going to show you why you need a backup wrench. So give me 1 second, guys. And before I get too carried away, let me look at the comments because I could get carried away here. Karen, what's going on? Awake and Dev, what's up? Getting to papers, what's up? Sherry, what's going on? Today is my birthday, happy birthday. Lily, what's going on? And guys, if you're just getting in here, I'm just going over the first question. But every question I have, guys, I'm going to try my best to match it with an illustration because if I just explain everything verbally, I don't think you guys are going to understand what I'm saying. But today is going to be a great day, not only for me to explain this, but I can show you in detail most of the questions I had. So once again, this is all for education. Hopefully whatever you guys take today can help you out moving forward. But right now, I'm just going to draw the gas line. I'm going to try to use different colors just to illustrate this here. Give me 1 second here. All right, and this is the union. And here. And this is the shut off. All right. All right, guys. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, here we go. I knew I had a, because like I said, guys, most of the stuff I have here is, I took it from storage, but I try to keep, like I said, just a handful of things here, not only to teach my guys, but this would be great for this video. So guys, what you got to understand, what I have on my hand here, this is part of the gas line. Once again, this is the gas line coming from the meter, which is, like I said, the entry point to the gas line coming to the house. But from the meter, you have your shut off. Your shut off is typically how you would turn the gas off to your furnace. Leaving the furnace, you have a union. Now, I'm going to try my best to explain this as simply as I can, guys. If you only have one, and let me see here, I don't have a, you know what I'm going to do? I don't have a wrench with me, but I'm going to use my hand as the wrench, guys. If you try to replace the gas line, right? And once again, I'm going to make the direction simple so y'all can follow along with me here. Gas valve. So guys, what I have here is essentially this here. And based on what I just said, guys, knowing that, like I said, this is the shut off and this is the union. If I didn't know how to replace a gas valve, and of course, guys, you have to unhook part of your entry line, because once again, there's two ends to your gas valve. You have the entry point and you have the outlet point. The outlet point is what goes to your manifold. But you have to unscrew the entry line to remove this gas valve here. But most importantly, guys, you got to understand, once again, you're going to need a backup wrench, because if, now let's say, prime example, if this marker is my gas line, if you turn the gas valve to the left, you could be tightening the other end. Now, guys, once again, I'm trying my best to explain this without having like two parts of a gas line with me, but you need a backup wrench to prevent the other end from tightening, because guys, with gas fittings, and you can go back to the video I made a few years ago, is how to remove a gas line or something like that. I made a 3-part video of this a few years ago. For reference, you guys should go and check that video out. But the reason why you need a backup wrench, if you go lefty-loosey, righty-tighty, you may loosen the piece of gas line that you're touching, but if it's connected to another side, you could accidentally tighten the other end. And if you tighten one end and loosen the other, you can't remove a gas line that way. That's why you have to look at the gas line as two different individual ends. You use the backup wrench to hold that one end in place. And guys, I got one of my hands on the phone, but imagine, like I said, my middle finger here is my backup, and this, my index finger here, this is my turning wrench. I'm going to turn my turning wrench to the left to loosen it, but my backup wrench is going to keep the force on the pipe to prevent the other end from tightening, if that makes sense, guys. So having a backup wrench, and the next gas job I do, I'll make a note of it to, like I said, show you guys. But I do have a great illustration of what I'm showing you guys in the how to replace a gas line. It's a 3-part video. It's from at least a year or two ago. Make sure you guys check that out. I think that would be best, unless, like I said, I had 2 ends of it. Actually, you know what? Hold on, guys. I knew I had this here. This is what I was talking about. Prime freaking example. And guys, I don't want to encourage you guys to be pack rats, but I'm glad I didn't throw this away. But let me show you something here. So look, prime example. This is the union, right? If I just put and you need a pipe wrench. A pipe wrench is what we use to disconnect and connect gas line. If you put your pipe wrench on this line and you turn it to the left, the other end of the pipe, you're going to tighten it inadvertently, which is something you don't want to do. So what you have to do to prevent the whole pipe from turning, you have to put a backup wrench on the nearest fitting. And the nearest fitting here, this is a 1/2-inch gas nipple. You have to put your backup wrench, meaning the backup wrench doesn't turn. The backup wrench is the stationary wrench. You put your backup wrench on the fitting right next to the pipe you want to remove. In this case, if I want to remove this 1/2 by 6-inch nipple here. I put my backup wrench on the nearest fitting to the right, which would be my union. And if my backup wrench is on my nearest fitting, my turning wrench is going to turn to the left, and that's how you remove gas fittings. Now, guys, I don't have my pipe wrenches with me. All of my tools are in the truck. But, guys, like I said, based on the question was how to remove a gas valve, how to remove a gas valve. If, like I said, you don't know how to remove gas lines, you're not going to be able to successfully remove gas valves. I repeat, if you know how to remove gas lines and connect gas lines, gas valves, it's pretty plug and play. But like I said, guys, if you don't know anything about gas lines, it's not going to be a good experience for you to know how to remove gas valves, because technically, guys, the gas valve and the gas line is one and the same. They're essentially connected to each other. You're not going to have a gas line going to a furnace without a gas valve being connected to that line, and vice versa. You're not going to have a gas valve unless you have an entry point, which is a gas line coming from the meter. So, guys, like I said, that question is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm trying to explain this, like I said, for the guys that never seen gas lines or gas valves before. Like I said, what I have on the board is essentially this. You have your gas line coming from your meter, and then you have the entry point here to your gas valve. But if you don't have your backup wrenches, or if you're not turning the gas line in the right direction, you may think that you're turning the gas line to the left, but if you don't have a backup, you could be tightening that same line, so it will never disconnect the way you wanted it to. So that's why, like I said, guys, for one, I made a great example of this, a 3-part video. You can check that out. But me trying to explain this without actually doing it, like I said, I know it could sound crazy, but I did make a video, like I said, if not a year, 2 years ago. You can search this up on my page. It's how to remove a gas line. I did a 3-part video. You can clearly see both wrenches. You can see the backup, and you can see the primary wrench. And I pretty much I break everything down in black and white. So make sure, if you guys want to do it now, make sure you make a note later on to check that video out. But guys, like I said, all this stuff could sound, intimidating, but it's not really that difficult. Just take your time. And once again, understand lefty loosey, righty tighty. If you have a gas line and you turn it one way and it doesn't move, you might be accidentally tightening it. And like I said, guys, I still make that mistake to this day. I mean, it depends on the angle. Sometimes you may think you're trying to you want to remove this line, but if you keep turning it and you feel like it's not loosening up, flip your pipe wrench and twist it the other way. You might be accidentally tightening the line instead of loosening it. So, but like I said, guys, this is all Lego stuff. Like I said, this is like plug and play. The biggest thing you want to do is don't make this more difficult than what it is. Just understand, like I said, what you want to do. If you know you got a bad gas valve, that's another scenario. Troubleshooting the gas valves. I'm explaining this, assuming you guys already know how to troubleshoot gas valves. But if you do, then like I said, turning the gas off first, and like I said, having the right tools, knowing where to put your backup wrench, all this stuff should be plug and play. So like I said, guys, it really didn't take me long to understand, gas lines. Like I said, I feel like once you see it, everything comes back to you. That's why it's best to, like I said, once you understand basic controls, understand how to troubleshoot them, understand, what the purpose of that particular control is. Once you know what a gas valve is, you know how to hook it up, you know what it's supposed to do, you know what it shouldn't do. Now, like I said, the next evolution from that is understanding how it hooks up. What comes after the gas valve, aka the manifold, and what goes before the gas valve, which is the gas line. If you got a gas leak, what does that mean? At that point, the customer should smell rotten eggs, blase blase. If they smell rotten eggs, then at that point, they should call 911. Gas company comes out, they turn the gas off. And at that point, they'll probably tell the customer to call your HVAC company, which should be you. And if once you come out, the customer say, I smelled gas last night. My gas company came out. They said that my gas valve's leaking. You go out there, and like I said, this is assuming you guys are, you're confident and you're capable of figuring out what's going on. But if you turn the gas valve on, you spray your gas line, and now you see soap bubbles bubbling up from the nipple coming right towards the left of the gas line, going right into the gas valve. If you notice it's leaking, you have to turn it off, and you have to disconnect the gas line, which makes unions very important. A union is just a breaking point of the same individual gas line, because if you didn't have a union, you have to disconnect the whole entire line. The union gives you a service point to open up gas lines relative to what you're trying to open up. That's why you'll typically see unions closer towards the furnace. If I had this union around the corner, that's not really going to help you out because you'll still have to disconnect each and every nipple up into the gas valve. So that's why sometimes instead of unions, you'll see flexible gas line connectors. Once again, unions and flexible gas line connectors is nothing more than just a service point for you to open up gas lines so you can get to replacing the valves easier versus, trying to literally remove the whole entire gas line just to get to the gas valve. So, like I said, guys, this is all plug and play. I just can't spend too much time on this because I got a bunch of other things to go over. But like I said, guys, if you're not, assuming you guys are already into this and you've seen this, make sure, like I said, if you guys had additional questions or if you wanted to see how to install gas lines, go to that video from my page. Once again, it's called How to Install a Gas Line. I made 3 parts on this, so make sure you guys go check that out. And like I said, it's very, very self-explanatory. I showed you exactly like what I was trying to do, and I show you the backup wrenches. So it's impossible, like I said, not to understand what's going on in that video. Next question here. I got problems with upsizing. I don't get, this is not problems with upsizing what? Let me see something here. Hold on, guys. Orifice needs to be replaced. Hold on. I'm looking at something I crossed out here. How expansion tank works. Problems with upsizings. I don't think you'll have to upsize an expansion tank. Typically with expansion tanks, and I don't have to draw this on the board. I already have this here. Now with expansion tanks, for you guys that don't know, this is a boiler. And you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 zone valves, and you have your ball valves and drains on the return. These are the 5 returns. It goes down. Circulator pump is here. You got another ball valve before and after your circulator pump, just in case you need to replace the pump. That's the vent line. That's the relief. This is your burners. This is my supply. This is my air scoop. My expansion tank is here, and my air vent is here. The question is, how to replace an expansion tank. Replacing expansion tanks are easy. Once again, if you understand hydronics, you got to first shut the boiler off. You may have to drain the water level down to under where the expansion tank is to remove that tank. Otherwise, if you try to replace this tank under pressure, you're going to have a bunch of water come off. So that's ABCs. But the question is, do you have to upsize an expansion tank? Now, I don't have any expansion tanks with me. We usually order those as we need them, but typically I think a 12 PSI tank is nominal. I think I've seen the one I put in a few weeks ago. That one was like a 10, but that was the smaller one. It looks almost like the expansion tanks you guys see on the water heaters, but to answer that question, you're not going to really have to upsize an expansion tank. Usually you put in what you take out, so it's not going to really be a scenario in which you'll have to put in a bigger tank. It's all relative to what's already on the unit. Now, I'll say like this, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Let's say if I have a 12 PI expansion tank and I go to the boiler, it's a boiler leaking call, hypothetically speaking, and the relief valve is leaking water. If I go to my boiler pressure gauge and my pressure is under 30, at that point, my relief valve should open up once it gets past 30. But if my boiler PSI is under 30, my first thing I'm going to check is my expansion tank. Now, when I say check the expansion tank, you can knock it from the bottom to the top. If that expansion tank is full of water, you should replace that expansion tank. And you should see the label on the expansion tank. It tells you the size and the PSI. If the PSI on the expansion tank is 12, I'm going to put in the 12. There's no reason for me to use a bigger tank. For one, if you put a bigger tank in, physically wise, it might not fit. So like that's something you have to understand. Maybe it's the reason why they went with that size, but 12 PSI is a nominal size tank. I don't know why you would need to go smaller or bigger, but if I know that tank that's currently there, I know it's legible, and if it's a 12 PSI tank and it's full of water, I'm going to order a new tank. I'm going to drain it down, and like so I'm going to I'm going to put Teflon tape over the threads. I'm going to put the new tank in. That should do the job, but I've never seen a scenario in which you'll have to use a bigger tank unless it was a botched install and they used a 5 PSI tank instead of a 12. But that's something the customer will notice up front. If you put in an expansion tank too small, the relief valve is going to leak water every single time the boiler runs. And that wouldn't be a delayed thing. That would happen on the first day of install. There is no way an undersized expansion tank is going to work without leaking out the relief valve. Like, it's not going to be a intermittent thing. That will be a constant thing. And like I said, that won't be a normal scenario. So to answer the question, guys, like I said, typically with expansion tanks, you install what's already there. There's no need to put in a bigger expansion tank because one, if the bigger expansion tank, for instance, if you go from a 12 to a 50, I'm talking those expansion tanks that sit on the ground. If you put something in that big and you don't have the space, now you got to reconfigure the whole boiler and all that for what? For one, you have to have a reason for doing that. This is not in like an aesthetically pleasing scenario. Like, what's already there is already there for a reason. So there's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Just make sure you know what's already there. And once again, you troubleshoot it first. Make sure you know what the pressure is before you go to the expansion tank. Because if the pressure is too high, you might not have an expansion tank issue. You might have a pressure issue. Maybe the feeder is bleeding by. So like, that's why I tell you guys, you never want to get too crazy with, like I said, getting too fixated on certain parts. Because like I said, guys, you slow yourself down. Like, so I'm assuming, like I said, if you guys are, working under someone, hopefully they give you time to diagnose issues. Like I said, if you go to a boiler leaking call, I'll call this the Monday morning quarterback procedures. You take your time, make sure you double check and triple check your diagnosis. You don't get too fixated on, hey, every single boiler leaking has to be a relief valve. No, it could be, but like I said, guys, you need to double check and triple check, your diagnosis, because sometimes it happens to all of us, guys. You could get a scenario in which, it's 5 o'clock on a Friday, you've been working all day, and you may think, just because the pilot is out, it could be a bad thermocouple. But like I said, you could have that thermocouple be, you could replace a thermocouple and it still don't work. Now you got a bad gas valve. So that's what I tell y'all. Just make sure, you guys are out there, like I said, just taking your time. I got to make sure I got my markers here, guys. Hold on. But make sure you guys are out there taking your time. I know some of these markers dried up on me. I got to make sure I get more of these. But guys, give me 1 second here. Where is my shit here? I gotta get a little organized because I brought a bunch of stuff in. I gotta make sure. Hold on, guys. Give me 1 second here. Hold on. All right. Where's my shit? All right, guys. What I'm gonna do is we're gonna get into the next question soon. I just had to I gotta clear some space up here. Let's get into the next question here. All right. Orifice needing to be replaced. That's not really I made a video about that too. And guys, it's kind of weird. Everything I'm asking on this, if I didn't already explain it, I probably got videos on this, but I can always direct you to the specific video of what I'm telling you. Like I said, how to remove a gas line. That's a 3-part video. The orifice, I think I made a video, if not a short, on this. If you guys go to my older shorts, I don't even know what the name of it is, but I think I made a video, if not a short, it should be a video of a Duquesne unit from a couple years ago. We had to convert it from natural gas to propane. I think we did the orifice in the spring. So we had that on there as well. Just make sure you guys check that out. And here, I'm going to show y'all bypass humidifiers. It's pretty self-explanatory. I think I went over this in the first video. For you guys that don't know, like I said, if you go to my highest view live, I think today is part 2 of the $680,000 worth of notes. But I talked about this in the first one I did last year. So you can check that out. But guys, I'm trying to separate what I already talked about here so I don't accidentally go over the same thing. I already went over zone valves. I went over how to bleed systems. I went over this as well, even though this is AC, not enough return. Fixed orifice, I went over that. TXV problems, I went over that. Carrier communication error, I already made a bunch of videos on this. And for you guys, if you know, you know. All 4 burners not lighting, only 2. You guys should already know exactly what that means. I already did a bunch of service calls on that. If you don't know what this means, I want you to look at my previous videos. I should have this specifically mentioned with trained furnaces, trained 90%ers. You should know exactly what that means. I'm not going to explain this in the video, but I already spoke about that. And I'm going to look at the comments here. Guys, I'm not responding to nonsense. As a matter of fact, like I said, I'm just going to remove any nonsense here. Way to go, man. Passing on knowledge. Admiral, you already know how it go. Like I said, I always try to help guys out. And keep in mind, like I said, what I'm telling you guys, most of you guys, if you're in it, you already know what the deal is. But like I said, guys, I like teaching this stuff. This is just ABCs. It's not really, if I got time to do it, that's the only thing, guys. Like if I have time to do it, like I said, I have no problem doing this. But not every Saturday. I got 2 hours to go over all this stuff. But today, I got time. So like I said, I got no problem doing these, like I said, a lot more often. I just got to have some time to do it. But communication error, I already did, like I said, a few of those. I think I removed, as a matter of fact, speaking of the double, guys, with these, I used to freaking hate, this brings up bad memories, guys. I used to hate these Carrier Infinity thermostats. Like I said, every single, if not 1 week, every other week, we used to get these calls. I go out for maintenance, and as soon as I go to turn on these thermostats, it gives you a communication error. And like, guys, I used to hate troubleshooting these because, like I said, this has nothing to do with the equipment. It has something to do with, well, technically it is, but it can either be, like I said, a loose wire. It could be a circuit board. But typically what we end up doing, guys, in this scenario, if the customer still wants these thermostats, they can still get these for like $1,000. But if they didn't want this Carrier Infinity setup, they already have enough thermostat wires. We rip the thermostat off the wall and we slap in an Ecobee or a Nest thermostat. But long term, guys, like I said, I always caution customers and technicians, if you're dealing with these Carrier Infinity thermostats, if they work, cool. But I preface this by saying, to customers, if the thermostats still work, cool. But once these Carrier Infinity thermostats start to have issues, I never seen a customer happy with this past 5 or 6 years. So, and like I said, guys, it is what it is. Like I said, I know these things are pretty expensive. If a customer actually wanted this, then hey, have at it. But I feel like any customer that has these type of Carrier Infinity thermostats, they should be wary of, like I said, what to expect down the line. But, like I said, guys, I'm talking from like almost 12 years ago. So like the first company I worked for, that's all we did was deal with Carrier, Bryan, and Payne, high efficiency furnaces and AC units. So I'm glad I got past dealing with this. So, but moving along here, limit fault, heat rise too high, always adjust gas pressure. Let me think about this here. Limit fault, heat rise too high, always high gas pressure. That is a great question. Let's use this furnace on the board, since I already had this on here. So guys, I got to draw the ductwork, and I'm going to go over the question again. It's basically asking about what heat rise is. Now, for you guys that do maintenances with furnaces, you should know what heat rise is. Heat rise is just the difference in temperature between the supply and the return. But every manufacturer has a recommended heat rise. If the heat rise differential is too high, hold on, let me see here. Supply. Let's see here. And I'm going to use different colors just to help with the illustration. All right. All right. And let's say I think a typical heat rise is like 30 or 40. Let's say for easy illustration, let's say if I got a 130 supply, and this is the flames. Let's say I got a 90, let's use a 40. Let's say I got a 90-degree differential. That's 40 degree. All right. All right, guys. So here's what we got. This is a gas furnace. We have our return. This is the air coming back from the house. And we have our supply. This is the air that's coming out the furnace into the house. Now, the heat rise, once again, is the differential in temperature from my return, meaning the air that's coming back from the house to the furnace, and the supply, which is the air coming out the furnace into the house. Now, if I had a thermometer in my supply, hypothetically speaking, if my supply temp is 130 and my return is 90, that means my heat rise is 40 degrees. Now, guys, one thing I can tell you, I'm assuming with like furnaces past like the year 2000 and up, like if that furnace is like at least 20 years or older or younger, I'll say, this information should be in the data plate. I don't have any doors or any pictures of doors here, but guys, the expected heat rise should be legible on the data plate on the inside door. If your heat rise is higher than normal, then at that point, I think you should adjust it. You have to look into what's going on. Now, guys, once again, when I say adjust heat rise, you don't change the heat rise because, like I said, once this furnace runs, the supply temp is going to go up to wherever it's going to go up to. But if your heat rise is too high, that essentially means that your supply temperature is way too hot. If that's the case, it's a multitude of things. Now, just going back to the question I got here, if my heat rise is too high, does that always mean that you have high gas pressure here? And the answer is no. The high gas pressure could be one of the reasons, but it's not the only reason. And guys, it's funny I just mentioned this. You don't want to get too caught up in, like I said, predetermined outcomes, I'll say. If I know I have a high heat rise, first thing I want to do is I want to check for airflow. I want to make sure that there's nothing going on with my fan. And once again, guys, if you got a high heat rise, your furnace should go off on limit. So like if the internal temp of the furnace gets too high, your limit switch is going to say, wait a minute, let me open up, it's too hot. So instantly, guys, a furnace is not going to run for an extended amount of time with a crazy internal temperature. It's going to turn off. So like, think about it like this. If my limit is set to 130 and the internal temperature of my furnace gets to 230, instantly my limit switch is going to say, wait, it's too high. Let me open up. Let me turn my burners off and let me allow the fan to turn on to cool the heat exchanger down before allowing the burners to turn on again. If you turn your burners off and the fan runs, that's going to technically lower your heat rise. And if you lower the heat rise, then your furnace should stay on and work. But if the internal temperature gets too high, you're not going to have heat. Like the customer should feel cold air blowing out the vents or no air. But that's what I'm going to go into now. Technically, a high heat rise means the internal temperature of your furnace is too high. But to answer the question, having high inlet gas pressure, yeah, that could be a culprit, but I wouldn't hang my hat on that theory. I would go through using my Monday morning quarterback routine. I would just make sure that the fan speed, I'm just assuming, guys, that, like I said, the unit hasn't been tampered with. I will first make sure, like I said, that my fan is blowing, make sure the fan speed is set to the correct setting. I would check my temperature, check my filter, make sure that, like I said, there's no restriction of airflow coming either on my supply or my return. Make sure, like I said, all the grills are open if you have, like I said, any shutoffs coming off your supply plenum. But if my filter is clean, if my fan is working, if there's no dampers, anything like that closed, like if this is an apartment complex, I mentioned fire dampers as well. If the links pop on that fire damper, that could cause the supply temp to get too high. And if that happens, your limit switch is going to open up and the customer is going to call you because the furnace will be hot, but the ducts are going to be cold. But you want to make sure that, like I said, there's no restrictions in the ductwork, meaning dampers or anything like that. But if my dampers are okay, and I know I'm moving enough air, then I will go to looking at my inlet gas pressure at that. And guys, I'm going to tell you, at that point, if I suspect that my gas pressures are too high, in a way you won't be able to see it because once the gas valve turns on and you get flame, the flames will look the same. But the only way to verify if your gas pressures are too high, you have to first locate your pressure taps here. You should have one on your inlet and your outlet. You get your service wrench, take the screws off. And most importantly, guys, I'm going to say this again, before you deal with any gas repairs, make sure you turn off the gas line to your furnace. You don't want to work on the gas valve under pressure. And for two, make sure the power is off as well. This is common sense, but like I said, guys, sometimes common sense ain't common. I always advocate for you guys to work safely. Like I said, whether it be gas, water, or electricity, make sure, like I said, everything is turned off. Even if you think it's off, verify it first. Like I said, if you got to get up and like I said, go to the breaker, if you have to trace the gas line back, to make sure that the shutoff is off, or if you have to get your meter and make sure you can test for 120, make sure there's nothing there. Like I said, just make sure you guys are working smart out there. Don't just try to rush just to save time and end up hurting yourselves. But anyway, moving on, you see here, once you locate your inlet and your outlet pressure taps, this is where you need your manometer. And based on what fuel source you have, whether it's be propane or natural gas, I think natural gas is 3.5 inches of water column on the outlet, and the propane is like 10.5 to I think 11. It's one or the other. It's like a range. But typically, guys, if your inlet pressure should be at least 1 inches of water column higher than your outlet. So I'm going to repeat this, guys. Your inlet point, meaning the gas pressure that's going to your gas valve coming from your meter, the inlet pressure should always be at least 1 psi higher than your outlet. However, if the outlet pressures are too high, like what I just mentioned, 3.5 for natural gas and 11 inches of water column for propane, if my gas pressures are my outlet gas pressures, outlet meaning this is the outlet side of your gas valve going to your manifold. This is essentially what's going inside the furnace. If my outlet pressures are too high, then you should adjust it. Like I say, use your manometer first to ensure what's actually coming out the gas valve. If my gas pressures are normal, then there's no need to adjust it. I'll repeat, if your gas pressures are normal, do not adjust the gas pressures. There's no need to. However, if my hypothetically speaking, if my natural gas outlet pressures are like 5 inches of water column, when I know it should be 3.5, that's enough probable cause for me to lower the gas pressure. And if I lower the gas pressure, that should lower the internal temperature of the furnace. But guys, I will only check the gas pressures after I verified everything else is okay. Make sure there's no restrictions, make sure the filter is clean, make sure the fan is working properly. And like I say, guys, this will be like the last thing I would check. So to answer the question, yeah, a high heat rise could be due to higher than normal gas pressures, but put that last on your list. Like verify every single thing you possibly can before checking the gas line, checking the gas pressure. So, but all right, guys, and like I say, any questions y'all have, feel free to put them in the comments. Once again, just try your best to make sure your questions are relative to what I'm talking about, just for time constraint reasons. But everything's good here. And let's get to the next one here. Power to close. I don't have a damper. I think the one I have is in storage, but this is a damper. You see here, this is a power open, power close damper. When I say damper, guys, this is essentially the furnace equivalent of a zone valve. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this on the board here. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm going to draw both illustrations. So instead of me trying to explain this once again without illustrations, I'm going to show y'all exactly what we got here. All right. So furnace. So you go on first floor, second floor, damper, and then you have a boiler. Let's see here. It can be a zone valve, ZV. Let's see here. Wants to return. Second, first and second. All right. Furnace, and it's the boiler. All right, guys. here's what we got. Check it out here. So to answer the question, let me show y'all here. So to answer the question here, the power to close, power to open damper, to understand this, you need to understand, like I said, what the purpose of zone dampers and zone valves are. It's very similar, but it's different as well. So I'm going to go over the dichotomy between zone dampers and zone valves. And once again, guys, I went over zone valves. I went over, like I said, Honeywell and Taco zone valves on my first video. Today is part 2 of this, but I went over, like I said, the difference in the zone valves, how to troubleshoot them, the whole 9 yards, like I said on the first video. So if you guys go to my most viewed live video, should have been from like a year ago. I went over that, like I said, a year ago. But today, like I said, I'm going more in depth with other questions, but not to get too far into zone valves, something that we already covered. The purpose of zone valves and zone dampers, if you have one system with multiple zones, meaning more than one thermostat, first and second floor, hypothetically speaking, if you have a boiler, you can have one thermostat control the heat on the first floor, and you can have a different thermostat control the heat on the second floor. So this is my supply, zone valve branching off, going to my first floor, zone valve branching off, going to my second floor. And then they both have their own individual returns that goes into what we call a header. A header is like a tree trunk. Think about a tree trunk. That's the big line coming out the ground before it branches off into trunks. That's what a header is. But you have your return header and you have your supply header. Now, with furnaces, let me see here. And I'm putting the arrows here for illustration. Because like I said, guys, I don't write the best, but I can explain all this. Let me see here. All right. So, moving along here. If, like I said, knowing that we know we need zone valves, if we have one system with multiple zones meaning multiple thermostats, a zone damper, which is very similar to zone valves, is something you'll see on a furnace. Keyword, a furnace, not a boiler. You'll have a furnace with ductwork on a supply on my plenum. It will branch off, and it should be labeled. If you guys are doing this the right way, label each and every damper. And this will be my second floor damper, which is going upstairs to the second floor. And this would be my first floor damper, which is going to the first floor. You don't really need, like I said, connections on a return, because this will be a central return. But like I said, most importantly, on the supply, this is where you'll see the dampers on the furnace. And these will be rectangle dampers, which would be almost twice, if not 3 times the size of zone valves. But the principle, guys, are the same. Zone dampers, assuming, what are they? I'm looking at the brand name now. I forgot the name of the one I looked at the other day. But guys, if you have zone dampers, you should have a zone board in close proximity to both dampers. If you trace the wires back, you'll see a board which should have a dedicated transformer, and it should have the thermostats from each zone, and then you'll have the wires, of course, from each zone damper. Now, the more popular one should be power open, power close, but sometimes you can do either or. Me personally, I prefer power close and power open, or probably, and I think the one I did, guys, a couple months ago, I think it was power close. Was it power open or power close? It's not, but the point is, guys, it was optional for me to hook it up this way, even though I used what was already there. But technically, you want to do power open, because without power, I think that I looked this up online, guys, like, because I was actually curious as to why it wasn't power open and power close. Like what you see in my hand, this is just a diagram of both. You need 24 volts. It's a constant R and C. There's a constant 24 volts between M2 to M1. For you guys just getting in here, I'm just showing y'all the diagram of a Honeywell. I think this is Honeywell zone damper on a furnace, but as you see here, M1 is constant 24. Well, M2 is constant 24, and M1 is my common. So regardless of this zone damper is opening or closing, I should always have 24 volts between M2 and M1. But if my zone damper is calling to open, I should have 0 volts between M1 and M4. And if my zone damper is not calling, meaning if it's closed, I should have 0 volts between M1 and M2. But you gotta understand, guys, it needs 24 volts to do either or. But I would prefer the zone damper to open when it doesn't have power, because in the event that something happens, if it loses power, at least it's going to get the air to that particular zone. That's what I was looking at online, but I couldn't find. I don't know what manufacturer it was. It wasn't Honeywell. This was a different brand. It was like some off brand. But it didn't. I couldn't find enough supporting information to hook up power open and power close. So I just went to the original setup. I just hooked up the new damper, how the old one was hooked up. But like I said, guys, everything I'm showing you, it's going to be legible on the data plate, so you can't mess this up. It's almost impossible to do so, but just take your time. Once again, once you diagnose a bad zone damper, meaning if you know you have power at, like I said, the zone damper, and you know, most importantly, the thermostat is calling for the zone damper to open up, then that should lead you to, like I said, figuring out if the zone damper itself is bad or something's going on. But always, guys, like I said, the common denominator from troubleshooting zone dampers on furnaces and troubleshooting zone valves, double check and triple check your work, because like I said, if you rush through this and you think just because the zone damper is not getting, or zone valve is not getting power, that something's going on with the valve, that's a rookie mistake. That's going to lead you to ordering the wrong damper or the wrong valve. And now once you come back in 2 or 3 days, the customer is already expecting you to have, a solution to the problem. And now you come back out here and now you're right back to square one. You wasted all that time, like I said, troubleshooting, but you didn't spend enough time confirming your diagnosis. And now, you're going right back to square one. Now you're 3 days into a job and, you're back to square one. But that's what I always say, when you're tracing power, this stuff could look intimidating, having 12, zone dampers or 12 zone valves. But the point is, you need to simplify what you see. And like I said, understand if it's not broke, I'm not trying to fix it, meaning if the customer has 12 zones and only one zone is bad, focus on the immediate issue. They called you out there due to the 3rd floor master guest bedroom zone is not working. Make sure, like I said, you pinpoint the exact zone that you're looking for. If I know that, like I said, my 2nd floor master bathroom, hypothetically speaking, is not working, if I can identify that zone downstairs, I'm locked into the wiring. I'm troubleshooting voltage. I'm trying to figure out if it's getting power. I'm trying to find this thermostat to make sure the thermostat is calling. I'm not worried about a zone that's still working. At that point, I will probably turn off every other zone that I know is working, just to prevent me from getting confused with diagnosing. And guys, the reason I'm explaining this, I used to get very intimidated my first 2 years. I'm talking to service. Even after doing maintenance, I used to always assume that, everything's going to be black and white. Gosh, that's not always the case. You can have a shit ton of wires all jumbled up. Maybe like I said, the previous company, or you never know what happens. Sometimes, guys, you don't know what the deal is until you get in front of the equipment. On the phone, the customer could tell you, yeah, this unit's been working well for the past 10 years. You go there and all the zone valve wires are all jumbled together. And they tell you that, yeah, by the way, my 2nd floor zone valve stopped working. And that's what I'm saying, guys. That's why it's important to, like I said, take things, like I said, step by step, but just make sure, like, so you can simplify what you're doing. You're not throwing crap on the wall and hoping that it sticks. Make sure you can identify what your troubleshooting is the correct part for the zone that the customer called you about, stating that it's not working. So, I've been in this 1,001 times. The best thing I can tell you guys is, this stuff isn't hard to understand. It may be kind of hard to comprehend just from writings, but once you see this hooked up, not every boiler you're going to go in is going to have a bunch of jumbled up wires. If you find one of those in the wild, have fun with it, but that's not going to be a normal enough occurrence for, you to say that every 2 zone valves is going to have a jumbled up wire connection. No, that's just, par for the course. You just, use the schematics and, like I said, trace it back wire for wire until you figure out 100% what goes where. So, but let's go to the next one here. We're already, 54 minutes in. We are rocking and rolling today. All right, let me see here. The next one here is, can you pipe the feeder from the supply? And that answer would be no, you shouldn't do that. All right, this is a relatively easy explanation. As you see here, the picture that I have here, and guys, once again, this is what I did on every single call for the duration of like 2 years. Every single job that I've been on, if I have questions about something that's there, I couldn't take pictures and send it because, like I said, boss man wanted us to get out within a certain amount of time doing maintenances. So what I did, if I knew that, like, say, this is a brand new boiler or brand new furnace, I would just write up quick diagrams and I would write questions. So the next time I run across someone that had the experience to answer questions, this is what I did, and this is how I got the answers that I needed to know at that time. But the answer here is, can you pipe the feeder from the supply? The answer is no. You should not pipe. Can you? Yeah, you can do anything, but is it guaranteed it's going to work? that's the question. But guys, you see here, this is a conventional 5-zone hot water boiler. You see here, my supply got the air scoop expansion tank. You got the 5-zone valves on the supply, and on the return, you just have your drain valves for bleeding air, and you got the ball valves. Ball valves are, once again, isolation valves. This gives you a point of closing off one particular zone for servicing. You know, if you have bleed, you got to bleed air or whatever the case is. You have your drain valves and you have your ball valves on a return, and then you have another couple of sets of ball valves here between your circulator pump, once again, for servicing and replacing the circulator pump. But the question is, can you put a feeder on your supply? Yeah, you can. Like, once again, guys, you can physically put a feeder anywhere, but here's where it can become problematic. And I don't want to draw on this illustration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a different boiler on here. And I'm going to keep the draw on that furnace up because I don't know what the next question is going to be. I don't want to have to keep drawing new furnaces on the board here. So guys, the question is, can you put a feeder on the supply line? And one thing you need to know is, once again, you need to know what the difference is between the supply line and the return line. So let's say we have our X tank, and you have our vent. So let's say it's 200 degrees. Going to radiators. Let's see here. I don't need to draw the vent line since this is a question about the supply and return. So here's what I'm about to do. Put the circulator pump on my return, C pump. And let's see if my return is, let's do 100. Let's do 100 degrees coming back to and from radiators. All right. And I should go first. All right. So now we got the illustration up. Let's rock and roll here. Now the question is, right here. The question is, can you pipe the feeder from the supply line on the boiler? All right. Now this, once again, is a gas boiler. This is my supply line. And hypothetically speaking, guys, like I said, my supply line is 200 degrees, which is very hot. I got my vent, I got my expansion tank, and this is going to my radiator. So this is from the system going into the house, which is going to heat the house up. And from the result of heating the house up, the radiators, the water temperature should get colder. And coming from the house, we got 100 degrees. You see this? 200 degrees leaving the boiler, going to the house. And coming from the house, going back to the boiler, is 100 degrees. My circulator pump is pulling that water from the house to get reheated, and the process starts all over again. Now, the question is, my feed line, where should I pipe in my feed line? Should I pipe my feed line into my return or my supply? The answer is, you should always pipe the feeder on the return. And now I think the answer to this is pretty self-explanatory, but once again, guys, there's no stupid questions here because we're all here trying to learn. let's say, guys, let's say if someone didn't know what I'm getting ready to say, and you know what they did? They was like, you know what? I don't know if I should put my feeder on my return or my supply. I'm gonna put two feeders in. I'm gonna put a feeder on my supply and on my return. Guys, this is wrong. You should always put the feeder on your return line. Because think about temperature, guys. Let's take this back to thermodynamics. Temperature moves from hot to cold. Why would you put in cold water? Think about it, guys. And like, let's say the temperature of my feed line is like, and this is coming from the water meter, guys. So like, and right now it's about 30 degrees in Pennsylvania. So let's say if I got 60-degree water coming in from my meter. So think about it like this, guys. Before I tell you why it should be on the return, I want you to put yourself in a position of where the water is coming from. I got 60-degree water coming in from my water meter. Why would you put 60-degree water? Why would you mix that into the temperature that's actually going into the house? Think about it like this, guys. If my boiler is heating up and it's at 200 degrees, if I pipe in water 60 degrees, with that 200 degrees, what do you think is going to happen? Now, that 200 degrees is going to be 140. And guys, I'm not saying 200 is nominal, but let's say if the supply temperature needed to heat the house coming from the boiler, if the water temperature, needs to be at 200. Now, if someone didn't know that the feeder needs to be on a return, and they pipe this into the supply, now you're essentially defeating the purpose of heating the water up to begin with. You're heating the water up just to cool it down, and you know it's going to absorb even more heat because the radiators are cold. You got to send hot water to your radiators. So now, if someone didn't notice and they piped in a cold water feeder into your hot supply line, now you're going to diminish the temperature, and like I said, it may not even cause the house to heat up. So, with that being said, this is wrong. You should not put the feeder on the supply line. Instead, put it on a return, because I don't even care what the feeder temperature is. Let's say if the feeder temperature is 60 degrees, regardless, the return line is going to be colder than the supply, because the return lines is the colder water temperature that's coming from the radiators after they gave up heat from the colder ambient temperature from the house. So if my return line is colder and I put in colder water, who cares where the water is coming from? Because what's going to happen is once it goes back to the boiler is going to heat up that water regardless. So that's why putting feeders on a return line is recommended, and that's the only way to do it. There is no other way. Like I said, you should have space to do this. I can't give you a scenario in which you have to put a feeder on a supply, because it doesn't make any sense. And you're going to run a risk of now this boiler working this hard just to put, like, think about it. You're having a boiler run probably for a predetermined amount of time to get the water temperature up to 200 just to cool it down. For what reason? There's no point. And once again, that's going to cause this boiler to work even harder and stay on longer. And now you're going to have more wear and tear on the boiler versus putting the water feeder line on a return and allowing, like I said, a constant temperature to come out the boiler. And now the water temperature only drops once it gets, like I said, to the radiators, which is normal because the radiators is giving off its heat to the colder ambient temperature. Once the ambient temperature goes up, the radiator temperature goes down, and then that's how the process works. But it shouldn't be a water feeder on a supply. If that's the case, like I said, guys, we see crazy things out there in the wild. So I'm not saying, like I said, you're going to see perfect scenarios at each and every time. Some people don't know this, but like I said, if you put the feeder in the wrong direction, this could cause, like I said, either the boiler to run longer, or this could cause the heat not to work at all. You're going to have, like I said, radiators with 80-degree temperatures going to it instead of 100 plus. So make sure you guys understand that. I'm looking at the comments. Left Northern said, hi, what's going on? But guys, like I said, this is pretty self-explanatory. Everything I'm teaching you is like full circle. It may not seem like much, but like all these notes that I accumulated, these are things that I've seen. I was in customers' basements, and like I said, guys, once again, I'm glad that I was able to write this down with the time I had because I didn't have all day to do one maintenance. But like when I first seen this system, I'm like, wait a minute. I used to play devil's advocate a lot. I'm like, you know what? I know what I'm seeing. I know this is my return pipe. I'm like, why can't you put the feet on the return? And like I said, I didn't have someone with me. You know, the more experienced techs, they were out doing jobs on their own. So like, but like I said, now, you know, at that time I was like, you know what? If I don't have the answers, you know, if I can't Google this, tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to write this down and like, I'm going to try to, you know, remember this the next time. Like I said, I see someone, hey, by the way, this is the system I had. You see here, blase, blase. Why can't you pipe this to this? Like, what will happen? And guys, like I say, you times this by like 2 years of constantly applying this. And I mean, like I said, it sticks, you know, but once again, you know, this is for the love of the game here, guys. Like I said, you know, hopefully you get to that point of like whatever you do, you know, whether it be HVAC or whatever the case is. But if once you apply yourself long enough, like I said, that's when you really kick things into eighth gear, man. And like I said, everything starts to rock and roll. But guys, I'm gonna go into the next question. But like I said, I'm gonna give y'all a couple seconds here to check this out here, and also let me know in the comments if y'all have any questions, because we're going over a lot here. We are going over a lot. This one's done. I think I went over this one as well too. I put here 2 aquastats for 2 circulator pumps. How do they connect? High limit switch parameters 180. Maybe this is something I've seen. It says here 2 aquastats for 2 circulator pumps. How do they connect to the main aquastat? Let me see here. 1 boiler, 2 water coils, house, furnace wired to boiler, no zone valves. That would be an external control. I'm trying to make sure all these questions aren't tied together. That's why I'm going through all these. Hold on. It says 1 boiler, 2 water coils, house to furnace wired to boiler with no zone valves. Well, technically it's not. If you have a water coil, you won't have a furnace. You'll have an air handler. And for you guys that don't know, guys, I think, what call was that? That was my first live video. It was a doctor's office. I think it was guys, if you look at my oldest live video, this was a 6-unit AC maintenance. Guys, the question that I asked here, this answers that question. And for you guys that don't know what water coils are, I came out to do an AC maintenance. I think this was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think they had 5 air handlers, AC only air handlers with external water coils. It was either 5 or 6, guys. But this shows you, like I said, that call shows you exactly how the equipment is, like how it looks. But you're not gonna have a furnace and a boiler connected. I think I didn't make the right furnace. I think this could have been an air handler. But 1 boiler and 2 water coils. I think I meant to say the furnace, but if you have 2 water coils with 1 boiler, that means you have 2 air handlers. It says how's the furnace wired to the boiler. Technically, what connects both of these together is the thermostat, and the only thing you need on the furnace is the G terminal. Well, the only thing you need on the air handler is the G terminal to activate the fan, but the thermostat is what connects the W, which should go to TNT on your boiler. The TNT is what's going to get the boiler turned on. And guys, hold on, because I'm going off on a tangent here. I think I should write this so y'all should know what I'm talking about here. Because, like I said, if I start explaining this, I don't want to get too far into this without illustration. But once again, get on button. But guys, let me know if y'all have any questions about this. Like I said, putting a feeder on the return is like ABCs. But like I said, once again, guys, there's no shame for not knowing this stuff. There was a point in time where I didn't know any of this. So I don't shame anybody for not knowing this. That's why I explain things, you know, in a very foolproof way. And like I said, any questions y'all had, like I said, while I'm talking about a specific topic, feel free to put them in the comments, because like I said, we rock and roll and we go over a lot of different topics and different things here. But the question is, one boiler, two water coils. How's the furnace wired to the boiler? I'm gonna use the black one here. So let's say we have a boiler. Let's see here, boiler. And let's see here. Supply, return, boiler. Let's see here. We have the air handler. Cool. Let's see here. We got the fan. We got the coil. And we have external coil, water coil. And I'm drawing a diagram from a customer's house. This is one of the customers that, not the hospital or not the medical place from that live video. This is a different customer that has this. Let's see here. I think this is a different one. He has one on the first floor and one on the second floor. WC. Cool. This is external. That's the fan. That's the fan here. Fan. And this is the coil. Here. All right. I think it's, how was this? I think he had a header. Yeah, I think it was on the supply header here. Hold on. All right, here. All right, here. Here. All right. So guys, here's what we got. And I'm gonna label this so y'all would know. Here. That's the supply. And this is the return. Let's see here. Return. All right. So here's what we got. So this is essentially answering the question from here. 2 aquastats for 2 circulator pumps. You mean switching relays? How do they connect to the main aquastat? Technically, there wouldn't be a main aquastat. Well, you would have an aquastat for TNT on the boiler, but if you have switching relays for 2 circulator pumps, the TNTs will connect. They will be wired in series. So either switching relay can turn on the main aquastat, which can turn on the boiler for one particular zone. So to answer this question, it'll be wired in series, all the TNT terminals. TNT is the 2 wires you connect that turns on the boilers. Typically, TNT will go to R&W on the thermostat, but yeah, that would answer this question here. Like the TNT, all of those would be wired in series unless you have like a switching board. That would be where all the wires would go. But I definitely seen this a bunch of times. You will definitely have switching relays with the TNT connected that will ultimately connect to all. Well, it will ultimately connect back to the main thermostat TNT. But 1 boiler, 2 water coils, that's essentially what we have here. Now, for you guys that don't know, once again, you have the boiler that just sends hot water to a coil. And you have 2 air handlers here. In the summertime, this air handler acts as a conventional AC. First floor, second floor. So in the summertime, not including winter, like I said, in the summertime, these air handlers act as AC only units. The only thing you need is a fan, a coil, and a condenser. That's how both of these AC units operate. Well, that's how both of these air handlers operate in the summertime. You have 1 air handler for the first floor, and you have 1 for the second floor. Now, in the wintertime, this is where things get very interesting here. In the wintertime, what you'll have is you'll probably have a zone valve for each. Well, you could have a zone valve or a circulator. This customer had 2 circulator pumps. He had one circulator coming from the boiler. Well, he had a main circulator on the return of the boiler, but on the supply line, he had one circulator going to the first floor, and he had another circulator going to the second floor. But guys, here's the thing. You have a supply header coming from the boiler supply. One goes to this first floor coil, and the other one goes to the second floor coil. And remember, the only thing that activates in this air handler is the fan, because you do need the fan to blow to, like I said, it's going to blow that warm air from the coil into the house. And once the coil gets cold, remember, once you have cold air from the house touching that warm coil, you have a temperature exchange. And now the air gets hot and the coil gets cold. And that is what, I think I drew this the opposite way here. Hold on. And that is how the heat exchange works from, hold on guys, make sure my arrows are going in the right direction here. And that's how the temperature exchange works from the water coil to in front of the boiler. Like I said, guys, it's very self-explanatory. If you're seeing this, like I said, the first couple of times, it could look kind of confusing because most of you guys, just like I was only used to seeing furnaces and boilers with radiators, but technically you could have a boiler with forced air, or technically with ductwork. I'm not going to say forced air because forced air could mean a furnace, but you could have a boiler with ductwork. However, if you have a boiler with ductwork, that means you'll probably have external or internal water coils, meaning you'll have hydro coils. That's another brand name for them. That means you have an air handler that connects to a condenser in the summer, but in the wintertime, that thermostat, this is something you don't see here. The thermostat is what controls the fan in heat mode, and it controls TNT on the boiler. So once TNT connects, the boiler is going to run, and it's going to send it's going to send hot water to the coil. But the thermostat is going to turn the fan on to allow each and every part of the house to get hot. So technically, guys, to answer this question, one boiler, two water coils, house the air handler wired to the boiler, no zone valves. Yeah, you don't have zone valves because you don't have, well, technically you do, but you don't. You don't really need zone valves because the thermostat for each zone is what's going to turn turn the air handler on. So that's the thing, guys. Like I said, with this, the thermostat is what controls each and every air handler. You still need the fan to turn on. Hot water, no water inside boiler while operating. What that calls steam equals pressure to increase. No water inside hot. So this is a water boiler. No water inside boiler while operating. What that calls steam. To answer that question, let's see here. Probably not, unless they bypass the damn limits. Nah, I don't think that will cause steam because like the limit switch should turn the burners off before it gets to that point. So let's look at this here. And let me make sure my battery ain't done. I'm at 57%. Hold on. All right. So I'm looking at this question here. It says, this is a hot water boiler with no water inside the boiler while operating. What that calls steam. Now, for you guys that don't know, that's the difference between a hot water boiler and a steam boiler. A hot water boiler relies on water and inside the pipes, and you have cold water that comes from the house. The circulator pump brings that cold water back, and the boiler heats up water to go into the house that goes into the radiators. The hot water goes into the radiators, and temperature exchange happens. You remember what I just said with the air handler? Same thing happens with the radiator. Once you have a hot radiator and a cold surrounding space, the surrounding air temperature picks up the heat from that radiator, and the radiator itself gets colder, and that colder water temperature goes back to the boiler, and then the process repeats itself. But to answer the question, on a hot water boiler, you have safeties. You have something called a limit switch. Now, this limit switch Let's see here. One. So, hey guys, I'm gonna go over a quick difference between steam and hot water. Now, what I just mentioned here, the answer to the question, guys. No water inside boiler while operating what that calls hot water to turn into steam. That's essentially what I was asking here. The answer is no, because you have safeties that if the internal temperature of the boiler gets hot or gets higher than normal for some reason, I'm going to give you a scenario. Let's say if the circulator pump malfunctions. Let's say if the customer or someone accidentally turns off the supply and return valve, like maybe they have isolation valves and they turn them off accidentally. If something happens which causes the internal temperature of the boiler to get too hot, that limit switch is going to say, wait a minute, I'm normally closed. Let me open up because the internal temperature is too high. And if it opens up, it's going to kill your burners until the internal temperature goes down. That is what will make the limit switch remake. But this should happen well before water turns into steam. I think water turns into 100% steam at 212 degrees atmospheric. So, guys, I can't see that happening unless, like I said, someone for some reason bypassed the limit switch and the boiler runs past 180 degrees. That's not a normal occurrence. But however, with steam relies on steam. It doesn't rely on water pressure. It relies on steam pressure. So technically, 160 to 180 is normal for a steam boiler, and that steam boiler will still run past 180 because it needs to get up to 212 degrees in order for the steam pressure to build and for that steam boiler to, like I said, for that steam pressure to rise up from that boiler and, like I said, to go to the radiators. So I'll say that sound, like that knocking sound, is normal on the steam boiler because, like I said, it relies on steam pressure. There's no pumps. But you're not going to have that scenario happen too often with hot water boilers unless, you had a isolated incident, whether you have a bad circulator pump, whether you have, like I said, someone accidentally valved off the supply or the return, and now you don't have water coming back to the steam boiler, or you don't have water or if you don't have water coming back to the hot water boiler, or you don't have water coming out the hot water boiler. So, like, guys, best example, like I said, this can be with a furnace or a boiler. Let's say if you have isolation valves on my supply and my return on the boiler. If someone turned off the supply, guys, and the boiler's putting out 200 plus degree water temperature, if that water temperature doesn't go to the radiators and it keeps building up, eventually the internal temperature of the boiler is going to go up. And if it goes past the limit switch set point, the limit switch is going to open up and it's going to kill your burners, which will stop your boiler from accumulating more heat. So, guys, like I said, every scenario, if it doesn't matter why the internal temperature goes up, but the biggest thing is if the internal temperature goes up past a predetermined point, your boiler's not going to stay on. So, but that should be why the customer should call you, because if the boiler doesn't stay on and the pipes continue to get cold, it doesn't get hot, that's when they'll call you. And like I said, you should be able to diagnose this in person. But this isn't like a normal occurrence unless someone accidentally turns something off. That would be a dead giveaway. But a boiler is not going to run, and most importantly, it's not going to heat the house up with a restriction in your supply or your return pipe if something's closed. So, yeah, this is definitely not going to be a scenario that's going to be something you guys will see. From the water feeder, zone valves, removing. I think this is just something I just wrote down. It's not like a question. Removing temperature pressure gauges. You guys seen that on the other video. I just drained the boiler down, and that's just ABCs. Let's see here. This is just diagrams of hooking up receptacles, which is ABCs. Hold on, guys. I'm trying to find some good ones here. Give me 1 second here. And like I said, guys, I got some of the stuff is like AC related. I'm not trying to get into like AC stuff because it's not that season. I can get into that once the weather breaks here. It was another one, guys, that I got here. I'm gonna do like one or two more. I'm already like an hour and 25 minutes into this here. All right. All right, check it out here. All right, so all right, I have one here. Can you have an HSI boiler? How many ignitions are there? All right, let's get into this. And I want to separate. This is all I'm saying. Like, I'm not going to get into this now. I'd rather wait until, like I said, the spring or the summer, as far as with compressors and hooking up contactors. But this is the last one I'm going to go into, and I'm going to make a diagram for this. Can you have an HSI boiler, and how many ignitions are there? All right. So let's get into it here. I think I mentioned this before, but guys, give me a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put each and every ignition on the board, and I'm going to to answer a question, yeah, you can have an HSI boiler, but I actually ran across this scenario, guys, a couple weeks ago. Well, actually, like a month ago. But tell you what I'm going to do. Let me put this on the board here. I'll be right back. Hold on, guys. All right. Let's see here. Right now, guys, all I'm doing is I'm gonna make illustrations of each and every ignition, and I'm gonna go into each and every ignition. But I'd rather do this while you guys have an illustration versus trying to explain this without you seeing it here. All right, let's see here. What's the next one here? It's all the same. I got my burners here. All right, let's see here. Got the gas valve here. GV. Boom. All right, that's going to be the SP. That's going to be let's see here. All right, I gotta use a different color for this here. I already got purple. I already got this one. I gotta get spark on here. All right. Let's see. GV. All right. This has the joint here. This is the spark zone. Let's see here. All right, that's one. This is spark here. Technically, it's HSI. You got that, 3. I don't think the smart one's going to be on there. I think it'll be 1, 2, 3. Yeah, all right, that should be good there. I'm not going to do. All right, guys. So here's what we got. All right, here I got all 3 ignitions on the board. Now, to answer the question, can you have an HSI boiler? I think to answer the first question, you got to know what the second one is. You got to know the different ignitions before you can understand what's possible and what's not. So the three ignitions are spark, hot surface ignition, and standing pilot. Standing pilot is what you guys have from like back in the day. I'm talking 30, 40 years ago. You'll still see these on standard efficiency water heaters. Standing pilot, you have your thermocouple. And guys, I'm not going to get into like too crazy, explanations because I think most of this is simple. But once again, I'm going to try my best to, like I said, just to dumb this down. But the similarities between all three of these ignitions are something you're going to see on the furnace. Like for instance, you have gas valves on each and every ignition. And like I got in my hand, regardless of the ignition, you still need a gas valve that's going to control the flow of gas on the call for heat. I repeat, regardless of the ignition, whether it be HSI, whether it be spark, whether it be standard pilot, you still need a gas valve. But the gas valve, the type of gas valve could vary with the type of ignition, if that makes sense. Now, that's what the GV symbol is here, but that's where it stops. All right. Everything from that point is differentiated. Starting first with standard pilot. Once again, this is something that we everything evolved from at some point. Like I said, 30, 40 years ago, this is all you had. Standard pilot, you have your gas valve. However, you have, and I forgot to put my thermocouple here. Hold on, guys. All right. However, with standard pilot, you have your pilot tube and you have a thermocouple. This is the only pilot that you have to manually light. You can't light the thermocouple doesn't light on its own. This is not electronic ignition. The other two are, but this one isn't. As you guys see here with the little flame here, you have your thermocouple, you got your pilot tube. This is what you have to push down, push the gas valve down for 40 to 50 seconds or 60 seconds. And this is the thermocouple thing that you have to relight and the whole 9 yards. That's one type of ignition. The other ignition, which is the more common one you'll see, this is the hot surface ignition. This is what you guys will see with most furnaces that's out there now. You still have the gas valve, but you got the igniter that glows. Once again, like I said, this is the more common one. I want to say like out of every 10 furnaces, 8 of them are going to be hot surface ignition. Now, this is another popular one as well. Spark ignition has been around for a while. Not as long as standard pilot, but you'll still see these on rooftop units. Now, with spark ignition furnaces, same principle. You have the gas valve. However, you got a spark rod that comes from the circuit board. And from the circuit board, it gives the it sends power from the spark ignition board. Sorry about that, guys. You got a spark ignition board that sends a spark to your spark igniter, and once there's a call for heat, you're gonna hear that spark, and that spark is how you get ignition. Once the spark igniter sparks from the signal it gets from the spark ignition board, the gas valve is going to send gas across that spark, and that's how you get flame. Very similar to a hot surface ignition. So a hot surface igniter gets power from a circuit board, and once the hot surface igniter receives power, it's going to glow. And once the gas flows through that igniter that's glowing, that's how you get ignition. And similar to the standard pilot ignition, once the thermocouple lights, and like I said, this is a totally separate process in a way, because once the thermocouple lights, the thermocouple sends a signal to the gas valve to keep the pilot tube on. Like I said, this is just a small flame. And on the call for heat, that's when the main valve opens up. And that's how the pilot light from your thermocouple and pilot tube, that is what ignites the main burners here. So it's a very similar process, but it's different. Like I said, once again, guys, you still will see all three of these, but the more prominent one will be hot surface ignition. Spark is something you'll mainly see with like rooftop units. And I think Rheem furnaces, Rheem is the only brand, Rheem and Rudd, that has on only has spark ignition furnaces, but everything else is hot surface ignition. You'll still have standard pilot like water heaters, but like so all three of these are fairly simple to understand. You just have to understand what you're up against. Very similar with troubleshooting, but all three of these ignitions have their own distinct differences, and that will lead you to knowing how to troubleshoot them and the whole 9 yards. But since we know how many ignitions there are and what the difference between spark, HSI, and standard pilot is, can you have a hot surface ignition boiler? The answer is yes, guys. Now I had a scenario a couple years ago. This customer said that she had a standard pilot boiler, and she said that the pilot light kept going out. I'm talking like even with a new thermocouple, with a new gas valve. I think she had a scenario in which she said that, I think she said something like, I don't know, was this in Philly or this is in New Jersey? Guys, I think this is in New Jersey. She said that she had a standard pilot boiler, but every month, regardless of like what was going on, the pilot light kept going out. And she had this, like we didn't diagnose this. She told us this after the fact. She said that she had a company come out to replace the pilot, to replace the gas valve. She had someone come out to inspect the chimney. She thought maybe that a backdraft was killing the chimney. She had a different company come out to replace the vent line, check the chimney, and like regardless of what was done, the pilot light kept going out. And guys, keep in mind, this is an older boiler. This isn't a brand new boiler. So eventually, she didn't want to replace the boiler. She wanted to keep that standard pilot boiler. So what she ended up doing was she ended up getting that standard pilot converted to HSI. So guys, I think they make a kit for this. I know you can convert it from standard pilot to spark or HSI. You'll have to replace the gas valve. I know Honeywell, I think, makes a kit for this. You have to replace the valve. They give you a board, and I think it's something else. Of course, the igniter, the ignition assembly, you'll have to get replaced as well. But it can be done, but that's not like a normal occurrence. So like, yeah, you can see, like I said, a modified boiler that's HSI or spark. I prefer modifying it from standard pilot to spark. But like I said, guys, at that point, sometimes you got to step back and realize if you're modifying it from standard pilot to spark, how old is that boiler? Because most boilers now are going to be spark ignition. You're not going to have brand new standard pilot boiler. So like, that's what I'm saying. Like with that particular customer, I'm not sure why she just didn't replace the boiler. Maybe like I said, she, wasn't in the budget to get it done at that time, but they actually modified her boiler from standard pilot over to HSI. So like, I mean, if like I said, if you can get it done, I mean, if the customer can get it done, I mean, there's nothing wrong with modifying it from either or. I prefer spark, like I said, if you're going from standard pilot, but keep in mind the biggest downside, which is why I think they went away with standard pilot, is that for one, you have to manually light it if it goes out. And of course, if you have a windy day in the wintertime, that could knock out your pilot versus spark and HSI. All this is electronic ignition. So regardless of what's happening in the chimney, these are I think direct ignition spark, meaning the spark, it's not going to be a constant spark. If there's not a call for the heat, if there's not a call for the furnace or boiler to turn on, this is like an ignition spark. So like, unlike standard pilot, you will always have a flame at the burners, or you'll always have a flame in the ignition assembly, regardless if you have a call for heat or not. These are a lot more efficient because, like I said, it only starts if there's a call for the system to turn on. And like I said, most importantly, you don't need any assist with, like I said, starting these. They start by itself. Unlike thermocouples, every couple of years, you have to replace them. I already mentioned that in previous videos as well. But yeah, guys, that's all there is to it. Like I said, this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. But guys, what I'm going to do, because I got to get my charger, what I'm going to do is, like I said, I'll make more of these videos. But yeah, guys, I mean, most of this stuff is pretty self-explanatory. But like I said, the time it's going to take for you guys to, to gel and, like I said, for the stuff to stick, it could vary. But everything I'm telling you guys, this wasn't from some class, of course. I mean, this is all black and white stuff, things that I wrote down in my own spare time. But it's cool, like I said, had this come back around full circle. And like I said, this stuff is like ABCs. But like I said, guys, I can talk this stuff from now to the end of time. That doesn't guarantee outcomes for like nobody else. It's really your path. It's up to what you want to do. But Guys, like I said, this stuff is just like ABCs. But guys, what I'm gonna do, this is part 2. I will make more parts to this. I got the binder from before. I got more flashcards I got in the other drawer, but I'll make more of these as I go along. I just gotta have time for it. But how much time we got in here? An hour and 40 minutes? That's not bad. But guys, yeah, what I'm gonna do is I gotta roll out, but I wanted to make this 2 hours, but I gotta charge my phone up and I gotta call this customer back. But all right, guys, there you have it. I'm gonna give y'all a couple more minutes. If you had any other questions in here, now's the time to speak now or wait until the next live video. But like I said, guys, with this, what I'm erasing now with the ignitions, I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. I think I made this topic a few months, actually like maybe a few weeks ago. I was always curious as to why you don't see hot service igniters on rooftop units. And guys, like I said, this is something I found online as far as the information. Supposedly spark igniters, like I said, has a higher longevity rate than HSI. I don't know if that's true. Like I said, I do know that you'll see a lot more hot service ignition furnaces than you would spark, but I was always curious as to why I don't see, technically why you only see spark ignition rooftop units. You don't see HSIs, but like based on what like said, I don't know if it was the manufacturer. I think it might have been like Chat GPT. It basically said that these are a lot more durable, but if these are a lot more durable, why don't you see spark ignition furnaces everywhere? I mean, I know Riemann Rudd does it, but like every other brand does HSI. I don't know, guys. Maybe it's cheaper to produce. I don't know if, like I said, there might be a direct cost benefit to mass producing HSI ignition furnaces over spark. You never know. But like, that's something I always seen. But like I said, I never really thought about it until like a couple weeks ago. But yeah, guys, like I said, with that being said, definitely just like I said, never stop learning. Like I said, especially whatever you guys see, is always a different perspective or like a different way to look at it. That's going to help you learn more. So like, even if you're doing maintenances or you're doing installs, I mean, whatever you're doing, always stay curious as to, like I said, if you do this differently, what will be the outcome? If you, hook this up a different way, always, like I said, guys, that curiosity to learn more, it doesn't really come from like someone teaching you things all the time. You have to take the onus on yourself to just learn as much as you can. How that looks for you is going to be different than me and vice versa, someone else. But you got to make sure you guys are out there rocking and rolling and applying yourselves. But guys, with that being said, I got to get up out of here. I got to lock up and roll. I will see y'all on the next one. Peace.